what a game. I don't feel like we got robbed at all. Al Michaels used to pray for times like this. Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Like a game like that, it's just so far and away better than most games we see on Thursday night. The first half was shaky, right? And you were like, oh, this is just going to be ugly. But I really think the game came down to identity for the Lions. First and foremost, going for it on 4th and 1 in that scenario is the right thing to do in the moment because your defense is down X amount of guys. You come in with 13 guys on IR. There's no team besides the Lions that has double digits guys on IR on the defensive side of the football. They have 13. And then they lose guys like Reeder, McNeil throughout the course of the game. I'm seeing Quan Alexander out there getting reps, and he doesn't look as fast as he used to. Okay, I'm seeing Jamal Adams on the field, right? Like I was like, wait, that's him? No, it's crazy. I mean, there were so many guys playing. Nowaski's blowing up Kraft. Like Zadarius Smith, who hasn't been there long, has been balling out the first, play of the game. Love takes a shot. He gets him down. So, as much as in the first half, I felt like Aaron Glenn came out and really, ultimately, we already knew he was a head coaching candidate, but I think the job he's doing with this Detroit defense solidifies that. There were times in the past where I was like, I don't love the back end there. I don't love the way they play defense. Now, even as handsy as the secondary is, even as many penalties as Terrion Arnold has, as many explosives as they might give up in that way, and as many injuries they have, I'm so impressed with the way that they came out and played in that first half. And it was like Aaron Glenn was like, hey, we're going to be aggressive. The plays they're going to happen quicker. We're not going to have a bunch of backups on the field for 5 seconds at a time, 6 seconds at a time. We're going to bring the fight to these guys. So I think in the immediacy, it was the right decision. As you look at the second half and we only force a punt once, if I'm Detroit, I'm probably going. Second, and I think this gets lost in the shuffle, it's not just about not wanting to give the ball back and maybe losing in regulation. You don't want to go to overtime and lose any more people.
Mm-hmm.
And, we lamented a couple weeks ago the Jags, that game where they're up like 52-6, and there's guys in the game late. And I think ultimately this was the right decision for the right now, for the long term, and then most importantly, that's who the fuck he is. And that's who they are, right? Fly on the wall. What's even being said on that headset?
Well, nothing for a while. I was like ready to read some lips, and Dan wasn't saying anything.
He was just listening to the other side of maybe why not to go for it, and he was just like,
"Yeah,
save your breath." But I think having gotten turned away a couple possessions ago, it was all the more important to go for it in this scenario because to me, not doing it is like blinking to Dan Campbell. And you heard his team talk about their mindset after that San Francisco game when people were calling for Dan's head about it, not his job, but his head. I don't know if you can call for somebody's head without calling for their job, but people were mad at Dan about going for it in San Francisco. Need I remind you, all those plays were there to be made, and they weren't. I think Dan's like a dad that goes around beating people up in front of the kids, and if he turns down a fight, the kids look at him kind of funny. And I think they've gotten to the point where they're like, yeah, Dan, go. You got to beat that guy up. Go beat that guy up. We're not going to stop you. In fact, we're going to look at you strange if you don't go for it because that'll mean we aren't who we say we are. And so everything about the decision made sense. A lot of other groups not doing that would have been like, but it kind of helps when Green Bay's got nobody in the damn C gap. Nolan, we're looking at all 22 this morning. Nobody in the C gap. It's the same play as the first touchdown of the game. Gary's not on the field.
Neither time. Neither time. They got nobody on the ball to set the edge.
There's no edge set.
No edge set. And nobody, like the play before that conversion at the end of the game, we saw Zane Anderson knife in there to blow it up. Not even to have that. Somebody in there to at least create a pile and let everybody rally. It was bad scheme.
Bad scheme, bad execution, and honestly, the Packers can thank themselves for losing that game because you don't go on the road to Detroit and spot them 10 points. It's just not something you want to do. The only thing they got going early in the game was Christian Watson, and he fumbled the football. And he's got the OPI that really hurt them in the red zone. They had 2 possessions.
That OPI is the game.
Yeah, that OPI is the game
because they have it. They have a chance to go up, get pushed back 15 yards on an OPI,
yeah,
and then have to kick the field goal to tie it. Detroit also did it at the end of the first half on that angle route to Gibbs. Instead of going up 13-7, they go up 17-7. And Matt LaFleur has the defeated interview going in the locker room. They, of course, responded. But, yeah, I just picture some nerd upstairs being like, hey, Dan, it'd be a 39-yard field goal from here for Jake Bates, the special teams player of the month.
He used to sell bricks. Now he's just incredible.
Yeah.
Bricks.
No, I do think it's funny the way analytics has been flipped. And I don't even know if these decisions are all analytically sound. But it used to be like the nerds saying go, and all the football guys were like, you fucking nerds just started watching. Now you're manipulating numbers. And now it's like the caveman. And the nerds are like, whoa, Dan. and he's like, no, we're going to do it. And when he does it, I get it. When you're down on the goal line and you got Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield, me and Nolan talked about this last night. I don't think it was necessarily a scheme issue, but I think it's a matchup issue that is going to be won by Gibbs almost every time. I can't find you a linebacker that's not going to be nervous as hell about Gibbs beating you to the pylon. Because if you have him in man coverage, and this is one thing I used to have to do occasionally, didn't like doing it, but peeling on a back, you're afraid of that angle route. But with Gibbs, you're so afraid of him beating you to the pylon because it's just a foot race. And the minute he sees man coverage, he's going to win that foot race. So what does McDuffie do? He's over the top. He's trying to win that foot race to the. You don't need to do that. You need to slow play it and be in his back pocket. So if he tries to cut back inside on the angle route, you have leverage. It's just too easy. It's taking candy from baby. But what a Detroit win, because we talked about all the injuries. I got this image of Dan Skipper puking in a trash can in the middle of Dan Campbell's speech. And he's like, yeah, keep puking, Dan.
Why do you have to call him out?
Look, because he loves it. Because it's like, look at this shit, dude. It was the most Detroit way to win. It's like you had all these damn injuries. You win going for 4th down a bunch of times. You had to overcome the rough 2-3 minute stretch in the beginning of the second half where it was like Green Bay. And I think this is part of it. When you're playing with backups on defense, you have the element of surprise. But coming out of the half, Matt LaFleur is going to figure out a little bit. And I didn't see enough shots early. I thought the flea flicker was a little wasteful. And I thought the timeout was really wasteful. Because if you're going to run the same damn play out of the timeout, you might as well just go 3rd and 13.
Because he was very concerned about the clock there at the end.
Yes. And they throw short of the sticks on that 3rd down. So
yeah.
Detroit just being tougher than the other team. Detroit just being – and Jaden Reed, there's 2 matchup things in this game that really matter. You have Brian Branch, and, people wonder why Jaden Reed didn't get the ball a lot. I would assume, without having looked at the All-22, that they got Branch on him a good bit. But there's also – what did you see, Noel?
Yeah, it was there was a lot of Branch on him, but there was also, I would just say, a lot of attention paid to him.
Extra.
Even in situations where it was kind of a committee approach to managing him.
And
they did a great job.
And that's interesting because last night you texted me and we were talking about the Eagles matchup that's inevitable. It almost feels like a collision course. All right, you go around the room, and you're not Eagles fans, but except for Nate, maybe.
Nate's a Broncos fan.
But let's say the Eagles played the Lions in the playoffs, which seems inevitable. Do you feel better or worse after seeing the Lions last night? After seeing Green Bay and the Lions? Because better or worse for the Eagles?
I would
Better.
feel worse.
I would think better.
I feel better.
I would think better because Jacobs had 3 touchdowns, but he only had 66 rushing yards. And I just feel like the way the Eagles are, like their offense is moving, I think that means they'll be able to score a lot of points. It doesn't mean it won't be a shootout,
Yeah.
but I just think like right now the Eagles can like put up more points.
Dude, the Lions have earned the right to be called the best team in the NFC. So don't get it twisted here. I'm not being Mr. Homer and saying, but what I am saying is like in the beginning of the season, it seemed like the gap was like this. Lions haven't lost in 11 games or whatever it is since September 15th. I feel like the gap's smaller now to where, listen, I think one of the fatal flaws that Green Bay has when they play this team is the linebackers aren't that good in coverage. Okay, and you have to have good backer play to be able to hang in there with Detroit. The backer play has been a lot better in Philly. I think one of the enormous matchups you have is Cooper DeJean in the slot, right? Because if you've got a guy who can actually compete with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's tremendous, then that gives you a higher chance of winning the game. You got Quinyon Mitchell, who can take somebody way outside. And then it becomes a game where it's stopping the run and shutting down the tight end. And Tim Patrick's been doing a really good job. But I think the matchup favors the Eagles more than it does the Packers. And I think additionally, the point you brought up, Jacobs had a lot of – they gave him the ball 10 times on one drive. The ugliest touchdown drive on Thursday Night Football last night was that, like, hey, Jordan's rattled. We're just going to run the rock, which I thought was really wise. The Eagles are going to be able to run the ball on a group like this. And the Eagles, if you're not going to get healthy defensively, if the Lions are healthy, as they were a couple months ago, I think it definitely favors the Lions. But in their current form, it is hard for me to imagine that the Lions match up defensively as well as they did against Green Bay, who was down Romeo Doubs. So you have somebody in the slot, you have extra attention paid to Jaden Reed, and then it becomes Dontavian Wicks has got to win, and he did at times. And then it becomes, tight end's got to win. And if the run game's not getting going, it becomes a lot harder. I think it's also, they had problems with blitz pickup. The Eagles won't have as many problems. And speaking of blitz pickup, David Montgomery had some huge reps.
Head over heels.
In blitz pickup.
Yeah.
And Jared Goff, we've gone this whole game without talking about Jared Goff. Jared Goff is a victim of how accurate and efficient he's been because we're bored with it. I think, the Nixon pick last night, we were talking about it. I think he's thinking it's 2 and Nixon's going to be in the flat, but Nixon, the play before, was in the flat. He took his little comeback, but then Nixon kind of baited him, and that's a rare bad decision from Goff. Other than that, the ball barely hit the ground as usual, and when it did, it was in the stands because he was making good decisions in the red zone to burn it. So the Lions just gutsy win.
You know who else I like that result for?
Who?
The Green Bay Packers, because they were going to be a wild card team most likely no matter what.
Yep.
Even if they had won last night, they're still a game back at Detroit. It's going to be hard to win that division. So you might have to go back into that building again. And I think that gives you the chip on your shoulder. Hey, we should have won that game in early December. We didn't. Here's our other shot. Let's get it done. I don't know who the vocal leader is on that team.
Yeah.
It doesn't, that person doesn't stand out to me, but I think it's just built in when you have a really close loss like this, that you feel you had multiple shots, that you're itching to get that chance again, and you can compete with these guys.
I think if they go back, it'll be close again. And having Romeo Doubs would help. Now the question is for Detroit, I don't want Detroit fans to be like, hey, what about us? We have 1 million injuries. If you missed all the other stuff we said, I'll say it again. You have 1 million injuries. Okay. What you've done has been nothing short of remarkable. Aaron Glenn again should be like near the top of the list. I'm sold. And that's another thing. You want to talk about windows. Detroit's window, you think it's open for a while. You just never know. If you lose both coordinators, that just happened to Philly a couple years ago. And while I think Dan Campbell is respectfully a superior coach, I also worry about that in this scenario. So why Detroit plays so fucking desperate? I think it's because they know that, I think it's because they're Detroit, but I also think it's because of the teams chasing them in their division. They've never been able to relax all season long, and that can make you really dangerous. You know, a lot of these teams like the Bills, you're going to be tested. You know, you've won your division. You know, it's very early. There's going to be teams that could be complacent going into the playoffs, and that takes a little bit of the flow out of the – you got to be in a flow state when you go into the playoffs. You know, it's one of the reasons we always talk about, do you play guys? How much do you play them in that last game? That last game against Minnesota might not mean anything to Detroit at that point. That's possible.
They would have to lose at least once before then for it to matter. But, yeah, it's possible it could be.
Well, they could lose to Buffalo next week.
Yeah.
If they're banged up the way they are now, I'm just telling you right now, I'm gonna be on Buffalo, and that's not to say they're the better team and they win the Super Bowl, but Detroit's banged up. If they lose that game, let's say they win that game and it means nothing to them at the end of the season. The Minnesota Vikings are going to play Detroit Lions. Let's say Minnesota can play spoiler and take home field away from these guys. You know, it'd be pretty ironic. Minnesota having to go to Philly because they beat Detroit. Back to the scene of the crime from 2017 where the fans were like, what the fuck is this? Or what the frick is this? They probably said. This flipping crazy.
What in the Culvers?
This flipping play. Yeah, Culvers is so good. I miss Culvers, bro. But yeah, it would have been, had they lost this game, we would have been talking a lot about like, whoa, what does this mean? Who's got a shot at it? Detroit just doing the same thing they've done all year. Just keep the competition right behind them. And we'll see if somebody can make a push. But just an incredible game.